The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening or good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Debbie Matulowicz, and I'm here in the marketing department at Sadlier. And with us today is Dr. Markuly as our presenter. And first, I would like to welcome everybody for joining us. Those of you who are new to our webinar series, we welcome you for the first time. And those of you who have been with us before, thank you again for joining us again. We're always happy to have you here. Feels like we're creating a little bit of a webinar family. With our presentation today, which is called Christian Unity in a Polarized World, Dr. Markuly is going to walk you through quite an extensive resource and explanation on this particular topic. The little bit of the background for Dr. Markuly. He is the Dean of the School of Theology and Ministry at Seattle University. Aside from being busy as a dean at the university, he also lectures nationally and internationally on topics that include issues of faith and culture, religious education assessment, and the application of brain research and learning theories to theological education. His research interests also center on the learning theories, and it's the theories as it applies to religious and theological education and the role of religion and spirituality in the American culture. Before we begin, I'll just review a couple little housekeeping details. Everybody is muted, so you do not have to worry about background noises on your in the rooms where you're sitting. And then the session is being recorded. You will be sent a link to the recording later, so you'll be able to go back and reference any of the points that you would like to review, or you can even share it with others. And then on your screen, you see a questions box. Please type your questions or comments in there, and at the end of Dr. Markuly's presentation, we'll address the questions, or I'll read them to Dr. Markuly, and he can address the questions and provide you with answers that you're seeking out. And see, as we're getting ready to begin, I just do also want to say, while I was preparing to introduce this presentation today, I was trying to figure out what's unique about today's gathering. I was, I guess I would almost say, clueless on the meaning of the topic. Dr. Markuly had explained it to me, but I had a hard time embracing it because I just never studied it much in depth. However, in trying to bring you into tonight's presentation, I thought, okay, let's consider yourselves that you're being embraced by a webinar. And the thinking on it is, as I'm here in our New York office, and Dr. Markuly is in Seattle, Washington. So we're on one coast and the other coast, and all of you are in the middle. You're throughout the United States. We actually have some people internationally with us, attendees with us this evening too. But here you are in between all of us. And while this presentation addresses Christian unity in a polarized world, I was tying together the theme of being united. We're united here together. We're sharing a common idea, and at this particular moment in time. And with that introduction, I'm going to go ahead and read to you, and we'll start with this verse set by Pope Francis this past September at a gathering to draw us farther into the idea of this unity. Let us ask the Lord to enable us, and Christians everywhere, to work to overcome our tensions and divisions, to strive, as St. Paul bids us, to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace, and to cherish the harmony which the same Spirit creates from the richness of our diversity. And with that said, I'm going to switch over the presentation to Dr. Markuly. We'll switch over to his screen, and the presentation officially begins. Okay.
Okay. Oh, can you hear me?
We can hear you. We need to have you show your screen. There you go. Perfect. Okay.
Okay. You got it?
Yes, got it.
Okay, let's put this here. Good evening, everyone, or late good afternoon, depending upon where you're at. It's a great honor to be with you. This is a topic that I have a great deal of passion around for many reasons. One reason is that I'm the dean of a graduate school of theology and ministry at Seattle University, which is a Catholic university and also a Jesuit university. And 16 years ago, my school was created as part of the brainchild of the local Catholic archbishop and the president, who was a Jesuit here at Seattle University, to try to create what they referred to as an intentional ecumenical school of theology. And by an intentional ecumenical, what they were trying to do was to follow the Catholic Church's decree on ecumenism insofar as trying to reimagine what it would be like for Christians to study theology together, to prepare for ministry together, to become more grounded in their own tradition, while at the same time simultaneously learning a new way of being able to be open and appreciative of the gifts of people from other faith traditions within Christianity, and to kind of just grow together into the best ministers that they possibly could be. So my whole school is actually built around this whole notion of Christian unity. And we have at this point 13 denominations that are actually in partnership. We have on any given year between 210 and 300 students. They sit in classes and they learn how to think as ecumenists and to do ministry from an ecumenical point of departure. So one of the interesting things we've discovered from them is that they actually kind of counterintuitively and somewhat ironically become more of whatever they were when they got here, while also being open to others. So they're a better Catholic or Methodist or Episcopalian or Lutheran or member of the United Church of Christ, while also learning how to listen to others, appreciate their faith tradition, and not find it so much a threat as an enhancement of their own understanding of who God is and how God works in the world. So with that as kind of a beginning, let me just kind of talk a little bit about what some people think about ecumenism and what it means. There are some who think that ecumenism has become something that the Catholic Church and other churches have supported out of a sense of necessity because of different forces that have been afoot for about 60 to 80 years within Western culture in particular, but actually worldwide. One is that Christians band together to kind of stand against the secularist tide and these forces of secularism that are kind of sweeping the world, but particularly in Western cultures in Europe and in the United States. If you follow the surveys that are done, my particular region, the Pacific Northwest and the Northeast, are the two most secular areas of the United States, but other parts of the United States that have been traditionally very religious are actually becoming more secularist as well, and those forces are actually making their way into those regions as well. Another reason people think that ecumenism is something that the churches are open to is because many mainline traditions are actually decreasing in numbers, and so they see ecumenism as kind of a backwards way of pooling resources where churches can share buildings, where they can share maybe even personnel, but it's largely driven by a need to collaborate because there just isn't as many resources to do the work that we're called to. And then I think the reason I probably hear the most is that we're all pretty much in the same boat, that people of faith feel like they're having an increasingly difficult time passing the faith tradition on to their children. You'd be interested to know that that's not just for Christians, but Muslims are having the same problem, and members of the Jewish tradition, the Hindu tradition. It's become a worldwide phenomena in which, with all of these forces of secularism, faith as a way of being orientated in the world is becoming increasingly difficult for people to feel like they can pass on to their children. So you have all of these utilitarian ideas about why churches would want to work for unity and try to get along with one another. But in actual fact, the ecumenical movement throughout the 20th century didn't have an origin in any of those things. and it actually comes from a completely different point of departure. The motivations for ecumenism are really, they're deeply theological. They're also predicated on the experiences of people of faith who took their faith very seriously worldwide, Catholic and Protestant, and who found that increasingly that our inability to talk to one another, to collaborate with one another, has created problems in evangelization. It's created problems in our relationships with our neighbors of other faith traditions and none at all. It has particularly brought a certain level of scandal to Christianity just in general. And that scandal has been increasingly taken seriously through the 20th century, not just by Catholics, but also by Protestants. So the actual grounding of the ecumenical instinct through the 20th century, if you start looking at it theologically, it's actually, the foundation is in two scripture passages that you will hear quoted frequently and referenced frequently by anyone who is involved in ecumenism. The first comes from John 10:14-16. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. The vision that Jesus had when he was banding together the apostles and the disciples was actually to have one community. And it certainly wasn't a community that was identical or uniform in any way, shape, or form. Peter was very different from the other apostles. We know that he was extremely headstrong. John and James got their mother to go to bat for him to try to get him positioned well within whatever the organization was going to look like that Jesus was apparently trying to create. There was a lot of diversity. Matthew was a tax collector. Peter and Simon and James were fishermen. You had, according to legend, Judas might have been more of a scholar. So there's a lot of diversity. They were part of different movements within Judaism in their time, but yet Jesus had this vision of them becoming one flock under one shepherd. The second verse that's frequently used is John 17:20-21. I ask not only on behalf of these, but also on behalf of those who will believe in me through their word, that they may all be one, as you, Father, are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. This comes out of a prayer that Jesus gives. And the ecumenical instinct is often thought of as not so much a commandment as actually a prayer that Jesus prayed to the Father and invites us all to pray and to embrace and to make our own. And increasingly through the 20th century, there has been a calls by popes and by theologians and by many religious leaders within Christianity that this prayer needs to become central to who we are in our identity as Christians. One of the most important things that we always have in top of mind, that we're always thinking about. And I'll talk about the reasons for that and why people have been moving in that direction in just a minute. So let me begin with, those are kind of the scripture passages that are the anchors, and there's several others, but those are the two that are the primary anchors. Let's take a look at Pope Francis's address to the delegation of the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople, which happened this summer. And in this, you will see 55, 60 years of Catholic thought on ecumenism. I don't know if you can see it in the screen, but I've tried to highlight some of the areas that began in large, intense debates at different times, but increasingly people who are deeply committed to the role of ecumenism within the faith are seeing these as essential dimensions of what Catholic ecumenism actually looks like. So the Pope's address was, part of it was this: the search for unity among Christians is an urgency from which today, more than ever, we cannot subtract ourselves. In our world, hungry and thirsty for truth, love, hope, peace, and unity, it is important for our own witness to be able to finally proclaim with one voice the happy news of the gospel and to celebrate together the divine mysteries of our new life in Christ. We know well that unity is primarily a gift from God, for which we must pray incessantly for, but all of us have the task of preparing the conditions, of cultivating the ground of the heart, so that this extraordinary grace will be received. What the Pope is talking about here is one, that this is something we need to be dealing with a sense of urgency and immediacy. It's something we can't put on a back burner. We can't get around to next year, next month, even tomorrow. It's essential to who we are as Christians in the troubled world in which we are, and we can't subtract ourselves from that. We can't withdraw from that and still consider ourselves to be Christians fully engaged with the world in which we now live. The Pope, just like his predecessors, of both Pope Benedict and John Paul II, and for that matter, Paul VI and John the 23rd as well, they are very much aware that our world hungers for truth, love, hope, peace, and unity, central core themes and characteristics of the Christian message in the gospel. And it is important to our own witness to model that truth, love, hope, peace, and unity. Our witness is deeply involved in this whole notion of ecumenism. It's the way the world looks at us, because when they look at us and they look at the church, they should be seeing Christ. They should be seeing God moving through us. And that witness that we have has got to radiate these virtues. So the Pope talks about proclaiming with one voice, not several, but one, having maybe diversity, but having a voice that's visible, that's clear enough that the world, with all of its noise, can actually see the good news being proclaimed, and they can actually see the divine mysteries being lived out through the common life of people of faith. The praying incessantly and the primarily a gift from God is a strong ecumenical characteristic and belief on the part of Catholics and Protestants that this is ultimately not something that we achieve. It's something that God has given us. And a big part of why we need to be praying incessantly and we need to be working on our own spiritual development is that we have to get out of the way so that the unity that God has given us actually is allowed to operate in our world. When the Pope talks about preparing the conditions, cultivating the ground of the heart, that's part of the work of what ecumenism is, and how we actually do that has been a big part of the debate over the past 60 or 70 years. So how did this all happen? And I'd like to take you back about 100 and over 100 years ago. There were a group of missionaries, I'll talk about in a minute, throughout the world, Protestant missionaries, who started realizing that the Christian message had a lot of, what we might say today, a lot of white noise. There was a lot of clutter through history. There was a lot of clutter in the way Christians talked to each other that made it impossible for some people to actually hear the gospel. Part of that historical record were shameful things that happened within Christianity, like the Inquisition, something that's sometimes been played up in movies and in fiction beyond where it's at, where it actually was historically. Although it definitely existed, there were people who were chained and tortured and tried to be forced into conversion. Spain, in particular, had a very strong Inquisition. This part of the historical record has been surfaced in our more secular times and people have tried to project it as being the only thing that religion was about and Christianity was about in the Middle Ages and in other periods of history. Right before the founding of our own country, there was also the 30 Years' War, which was a lot of political, territorial fighting, but religion was used and was integral to the reasons that people march off the war to fight each other and kill each other. The founders of our nation were very, very sensitive to this particular war, and our First Amendment, the separation of church and state, is actually grounded in an attempt by the founders to try to keep the passions of religion and the passions of politics separate, because they had so fresh in their memory the horrible tragedies that can come about when those two powerful forces in life end up getting mixed in an unholy mixture. So their intent was always to keep religion a significant part of the American social and cultural fabric, but to make sure that it had limited access to politics, and to make sure that politics actually had absolutely no ability to be able to manipulate religion. So, and then lastly, over the last century, one of the things that happened increasingly with the role that our technology ended up clearly having on us, on our ability to be able to do heinous things to one another, and to be able to create unbelieved and unimagined levels of destruction. Christians throughout the middle of the 20th century in particular realized we're in a whole new period in human history in which we can do incalculable damage, and evil can run rampant in ways that it was virtually unthinkable in any other time in history. And so that those of us who live in this time, where this is part of our givens of life, that we need to pray and to think in common about the role that we can collectively play. And a lot of the differences that we've had, we've got to figure out a way to be able to get beyond those differences through understanding or through acceptance of diversity, so that we can at least have enough of a common voice that we can talk sense to the world in which we live. So this particular movement toward trying to connect with our commonality within baptism kind of coincided with academic interest through the 19th century, and before that into the Italian Renaissance, in trying to get to the roots of Christianity, and a reclaiming of those early centuries of Christianity in which, at the Council of Nicaea and Constantinople, particularly at Nicaea, there was an awareness that Christ's vision for the church was that we would be one, that we would be apostolic, that we would be Catholic, and that we would be holy. The Catholic, as was pointed out in the webinar we did earlier today, the Catholic means universal. There was a real sense of the fact that the church had to constantly be working toward its own unity. And again, that didn't mean at all that we would all had to look alike or talk alike, but that we shared a common embrace of the mission that Jesus gave us, that we recognize within our baptism our call to be responding to God in the ways that Jesus had pointed out. So I think, as far as within the Catholic tradition, there's many people, both Catholic and Protestant, who have carried the burden and have had the burden of a prophet's heart, I think, in matters of ecumenism and the problem that our divisions within Christianity have caused for both us and for the world's ability to hear us and hear the message that Jesus asks us to proclaim. Probably someone who's carried it as well or better in the Catholic tradition than anyone else is Cardinal Walter Casper. And if you're looking for some real common ways when this is over to apply ecumenism into your parish situation, I recommend a small book he wrote called The Handbook of Spiritual Ecumenism, which is some real practical applications of ecumenical thinking and action. And notice how Cardinal Casper in this book makes reference to the ecumenical instinct that he himself wrestles with in his prayer and in his apostolic work. We need to feel the painful wound of division in our hearts, in our minds, and in our prayers. This experience makes us aware of how much harm has been caused by pride and selfishness, by polemics and condemnations, by disdain and presumption. It also awakens in us a readiness to engage in a serious examination of conscience, recognizing our faults and trusting in the reconciling power of the gospel. Cardinal Casper carries within him a sense of the pain that this divisions within Christianity actually causes, and he believes that a true ecumenist has to be a person of deep prayer, and has to actually carry in their heart and mind and within their spirit the effect that this division has on the world, first on Christianity, by not allowing us to be able to live up to who we're called to be, and we have the potential for being more Christ-like than we live out to get in our common lives. But also that we're aware that how much this pain causes others, and we're also when he talks about pride and selfishness and polemics and condemnations and disdain and presumption, he's saying that if you look at the historical record and you look at it as objectively as you can, you see that that existed on the part of all the players within Christianity. That the Catholic Church itself also had issues that you can see very clearly when you read the history, that we also made mistakes, and that one person's mistake mixed with another person's mistake kept getting ratcheted up, and increasingly more and more anger and frustration and division ended up resulting due to that sin that was part of what was going on at that time. So here's a Protestant's perspective on ecumenism and where it comes from. Michael Kinnaman is the former executive secretary of the National Council of Churches, an organization that was founded in an attempt to try to help build Christian unity. Kinnaman says, the ecumenical vision is concerned with the visible unity of the church, a unity tangible enough that it makes a witness to the world of God's power to reconcile. You'll notice that part of what the concern is that in a divided and polarized world, where can you go, where can you find a power of reconciliation operational in people's lives? And what an ecumenist will say, a Christian ecumenist will say, is that people need to be able to look to the churches and to those who follow Jesus Christ to be able to see that there is a God, and that this God actually provides the power to reconcile over difference, over hurts, over wounds, over all kinds of things that separate the human race, and a lot of people think it's something that you can't ever surmount. Kinnaman continues, participants in the movement seek to expand the circle of our active empathy beyond ourselves, our neighborhoods, our denominations, our nations, to include the oikumene, a Greek word that means household of faith. It's the Greek word from which ecumenism is created. In another part of his book, The Vision of the Ecumenical Movement, Kinnaman has this to say about ecumenism. It does not presume to create unity. Rather, it works at breaking down the divisions that humans have created and nurtured so that the unity God already gives us becomes visible to the world. So you see again, the idea behind ecumenism is that the unity purchased through Christ's life and death and resurrection that has been given to us as followers of Christ as a gift from God is something that already exists. It's just not visible. And it already exists in many places that are not terribly visible within our own lives. Within the marriages where we have marriages of people from one Christian tradition to another, the people, Lutherans and Methodists, who get to know each other at work and become good friends and help to raise each other's children. When you have Pentecostals and Catholics who work together side by side and come to appreciate one another and see within each other the Spirit of God operational in their life. These are all areas in which the unity that we have has actually becomes visible. So Kinnaman's calling for that. Here are a few other thinkers and ecumenists in the way that they talk about it. From Philip Potter, what we are, we must become. We're already joined together through our baptism, through our commitment to follow Christ in our lives. We just need to, we need to learn how to become what we already are at the deepest core of our spirits. John Howard Yoder is a Mennonite theological educator. He put it this way: there is a gift quality of the gospel which is precisely what we have been, despite ourselves, made one with the people with whom we are not one. There's something that's counterintuitive here. There's something, again, that's not visible, but we're made one with people that we don't look like we're one, that we are with one. Pope John Paul II, in many places, refers to ecumenism as brotherhood rediscovered. We are connected, we are brothers and we are sisters. We forgot it, we lost it, and we're rediscovering it. And he considered the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, as painful as they were, as incomplete and imperfect as they were, to be a time of great blessing because of that rediscovery of our sisterhood and our brotherhood. And then Michael Kinnaman also makes reference in his book to an experience he had in 1991 during the Persian Gulf War when he was actually in Baghdad, and a Chaldean Catholic bishop was talking to him. There was bombing going on in the city, and the bishop ended up saying to Kinnaman, these bombs, they are falling on you too. And it haunted Kinnaman and still does to this day, because he realized that something that happens to a Christian in the Amazon happens to me. Something that happens to a Christian in South Africa or Nigeria happens to me. Something that happens to a Christian in the forests or the jungles of southern Vietnam or in Indonesia is something that happens to me, and vice versa, that we are inherently linked at an unbelievably deep level. So humanism operates on a principle that in one formula agreement in 1997 among a number of churches trying to seek to find ways to collaborate with one another, they refer to it this way, that ecumenism operates on a because, therefore logic versus an if-then logic. And so they explain that essentially this way, that an if-then logic is if I love my neighbor, God will love me. Or if I do this, God will provide this. Whereas the gospel has a because, therefore logic that's built into it. Because God loves me, therefore I am freed and empowered to love my neighbor. We are freed and empowered to love our neighbor. And ecumenism is very much aware of the fact that God takes the initiative for this, and what we have to do is actually live out the therefore. So here is one of the fundamental principles that ecumenism operates out of. It's called the Lund principle. It began in 1952, and I won't read this to you. You can take a look at it on your screens. But essentially, the Lund, in more colloquial language, the Lund principle essentially says this: we should be hold as an ideal and as a goal to do everything we can together with other Christians, except for those things in which our personal convictions seem to be irreconcilable. And those things we need to bracket off, we need to set aside, and to work with each other on the things that we actually feel, every possible thing that we can think of that we can actually do together. Prayer, Habitat for Humanity projects, searching the scriptures possibly together, trying to find ways to help young married couples to get off to a good start with their marriages. Any place where we can collaborate and be able to share kind of our common mission out of our baptism, we should try to do that. That's the Lund principle. So a quick history lesson, and then we'll pause for some opportunity to do a little bit of talking. And you can maybe ask some questions. Where did this ecumenism come from? I made reference to this before. In Edinburgh in 1910, Protestant missionaries from around the world have been having all kinds of failures with their efforts in the mission field, and due to nothing other than the fact that places they were trying to minister to people that were not Christian, they started recognizing that Christians don't seem to get along with each other. And they picked up enough on the gospel and what the gospel was trying to say to realize whatever Jesus was about, he was about trying to bring together one flock with him as the shepherd. And so consequently, if these people can't get along with each other, there's not much of a message here. And maybe Jesus wasn't who he said he was. This particular group came together and they said, this is the most fundamental problem we're facing as Christians in the world as we now experience it. And we've been divided and at each other's throats at times for centuries. What are we going to do about this? So they ended up, actually after many years of conversation, in 1948, right after the war, they created the World Council of Churches. This is a photograph of the first gathering that they had in Amsterdam. And the whole idea behind it was to try to begin to rebuild and rediscover the unity that the church once had in its historic memory in its early years. Although if you read the epistles, it was never perfect. It was always, there were always divisions, there were always struggles. But this became a passion for many people in many different Protestant traditions. The Catholic version of this World Council of Churches and this Edinburgh experience was obviously Vatican II. And that's where ecumenism really took root within the Catholic tradition. After the World Council of Churches started in 1948, there was a number of Catholic theologians who became interested in some of the conversations that these Protestant theologians and leaders were having, two of them significant to the council, a few others, but two of the people who were the most involved was the German Jesuit Karl Rahner and the French Dominican Yves Congar. And they, when John the 23rd announced that he was going to hold the Vatican Council, the group that they had been working with wrote a document about ecumenism and a few other issues, sent it to the Pope, and he invited them to become part of the agenda for the council. So when the council came together, it was bringing together bishops from around the world. Lower left-hand corner, you'll see Karl Wojtyla, the future John Paul II, who ended up signing the decree on ecumenism and was very supportive of it, and became one of the past century's strongest ecumenists. If you really know his work, he believed that we had to figure out a way to move toward greater unity, and he did everything he could in his pontificate to do that. John the 23rd actually was very deeply committed to it as well, so much so that he insisted that Protestants be allowed to be observers at the council. So, and that was not an easy thing to do, because many of those Protestants were suspicious of the Catholic Church. But after careful negotiation, after careful discussion over a long period of time, they ended up actually becoming observers, and they ended up getting front row seats at the whole entire council. Only a few months, years before this event, many Catholics would have considered these people to be heretics or schismatics. They were now sitting in the front row. They were listening to the Pope. They were listening to the discussion at the coffee bars. They were mixing with the bishops and having dinner with them. And they eventually, their suspicions and their concerns about Catholicism began to melt, and they started realizing, yes, I see brothers and sisters within this tradition that I never was allowed to be able to see myself. This is John Paul meeting a lot of these leaders who were figures.
Of course.
Yes?
I mean, thank God Sarah was with you.
I beg your pardon?
Just go on. There was some noise on the background. Sorry.
Okay, not a problem. Okay, so I'm almost done here. There's several different documents where you can find the Church's ecumenical thinking, and I don't know if you can see these highlighted in here, but there were constitution decrees and declarations at Vatican II. On the Church, Lumen Gentium, the decree in ecumenism, Unitatis Redintegratio, in the declarations on non-Christian religion, Nostra Aetate, and on religious liberty. Those were all discussed in the early drafts. The ideas in those documents were all connected to each other in some ways, and ecumenism was actually connected to what the Church is in the world in Lumen Gentium, and the role that we need to play within our common life together, and also religious liberty. And it was over the course of many, many discussions in several years that these ideas ended up being separated into different documents. I apologize for this. I seem to be having some trouble with justification. But here's just a couple of things that the decree on ecumenism taught. Number one, division among Christians openly contradicts the will of Christ. It scandalizes the world and damages the holy cause of preaching the gospel to every creature. You can see that they're not pulling any punches there. This is really serious business, and they saw it as serious business, these divisions. We can only do this by praying for a holier life with a change of heart and allowing the Holy Spirit to genuinely change us from within. And the prayer and a spiritual ecumenism needs to precede everything else, because we need a new heart and a new mind to be able to have these kinds of conversations and overcome these kinds of divisions. And the fourth one is that there needs to be a dialogue of truth on both sides of an ecumenical conversation, in which we're genuinely concerned in understanding the doctrines, history, spiritual, liturgical life, religious psychology of people in other religious traditions, and being free to share what we believe about that, and to know what we believe about it first, and then be willing to share about it. And then we need to meet on equal ground. There's no winners and losers in ecumenical conversation according to Catholic teaching. And in fact, if anyone goes into it with a winning and losing approach, it's going to be poison for everybody. So here's the two types of dialogues that ended up being given birth after the council. One was multilateral, mostly through the Faith and Order Commission of the World Council of Churches, in which large groups of people got together and discussed things like baptism or ministry, authority in ministry, and that sort of thing. Those are all very good, and the World Council had been doing that since Edinburgh, since 1910, or shortly thereafter. The Catholic approach to ecumenical dialogue, though, took a little bit of a different slant, because the Catholic leaders realized that a lot of the divisions are between different religious traditions rather than all of us together. So we started a Lutheran and Methodist dialogue in '67, an Anglican and Reformed dialogue in 1970, a Pentecostal and evangelical dialogue in '72 and '77, on down through this line. Each one of these dialogues ended up teaching us more things about the other, and helped us realize that although the church believes that the one true church subsists, that's the word we use, subsists in the Catholic tradition, that some of our Protestant brothers and sisters have actually lived part of that Catholic tradition with a capital T in a much better way than we have sometimes. So from the Lutherans, we learned that the Bible and Scripture needs to be central to our spirituality and to who we are. From the Anglicans, we learned that we need to take the lay state very seriously, and lay people need to have need to make contributions to the life of the church and the issues that the church faces, because they have perspectives and expertise that the church really fully needs. So this has helped us to develop our own sense of wisdom. All of these conversations we then had to apply on the common level, and I again refer to you to Walt Casper's book on spiritual ecumenism, which has lots of those things. And then let me just end with this, and then maybe we can talk a little bit. John Paul II, one of his great treatises on ecumenism is in his encyclical Ut Unum Sint, and this is what Pope John Paul II has to say about ecumenism. The Catholic Church embraces with hope the commitment to ecumenism as a duty of the Christian conscience, enlightened by faith and guided by love. Ecumenism is an organic part of the Church's life and work, and consequently must pervade all that she is and does. It's not a subsidiary part of it. It pervades. It has to inform and infuse everything we do. To believe in Christ means to desire unity. To desire unity means to desire the Church. To desire the Church means to desire the communion of grace, which corresponds to the Father's plan from all eternity. Such is the meaning of Christ's prayer, Ut Unum Sint. There's a bishop who wrote a very interesting, a cardinal actually, who wrote a very, very interesting summary of the ecumenical and interreligious dialogue documents, Edward Idris Cardinal Cassidy. And Cardinal Cassidy actually, in making reference to this particular passage from Ut Unum Sint, goes so far as to say the Pope is so strong on this, and the Council was so strong on this, that a question that naturally comes from this is that if we don't develop eventually an ecumenical heart and mind and spirit, that we really have to wonder if we are really in full, if we are actually a full, as he puts it, citizen of the Church. Because over the 20th century, we've realized this is such an integral part of who we need to be as Christians that it needs to be manifested in our life in some way that's visible, that people can see, that we can see and reflect upon and deepen in our life. And if you look at some of the applications of this thought, and this is something you can get out of Cardinal Casper's book, one thing is just to pray with people of other Christian traditions, doing Lectio Divina. And these are some sources that he ends up making reference to that actually offer wonderful opportunities for people to have common scriptural meditation that they do. These are some of the other sections in his book where he talks about focusing on Mary, the Mother of God, which Protestants have become interested in the past century, and having substantive conversations about her. Martyrs and witnesses actually are the most clear representation of who we are as followers of Christ, and the martyrs and witnesses of all the various traditions have given their all for their faith, and we should find common ground within that, their willingness to sacrifice. Saints, prayers and worship, sacramental preparation, to the degree we can do that, Within the Catholic tradition, we consider the Eucharist to be so much a representation of our unity that until we actually have more unity, particularly around some serious doctrinal issues, that it's not possible for us to share that particular sacrament with others, although there's lots of other things we can do as far as preparing for marriage and that sort of thing. And then lastly, mixed marriages. We have people that are marrying that are cross-Christian denominations, and oftentimes there are resources in a community on what ecumenism actually looks like when you have a good marriage and people that are living different Christian traditions through their life. Oftentimes model the very kinds of behaviors and discussions that the ecumenical movement is all about. So I'm going to pause there. There's a whole lot more that we could talk about, but hopefully that gives you kind of an overview of what ecumenism in the Catholic tradition is about, how it came about, and how it's connected to the Protestant versions of this.
Thank you, Dr. Markuly. This was great. I like your resources that you've listed here, as well as the practical applications and how this affects us in our own parishes. I do have some questions here. Also some requests for you to come back again. So anyway, so that's pretty nice. And first of all, I owe everybody an apology. I was opening up the question box, and by accident I unmuted one person, and I probably picked the person with the most noise in the background. So I do apologize for that little bit of audio distort a few minutes ago. Here's our first question. How has ecumenism impacted the racial and ethnic divide in Christianity, which indicts Christians as being, or Christianity as being hypocritical before the secular world?
Wow, that's a complicated question that should lead into a graduate program.
Maybe it's one of your students that wrote it.
You know, it's a very astute question, because the ecumenical dialogue and discussion over the past century, the more it has continued, the more it's been obvious what the role that culture and race and language plays in our ability to be able to articulate our faith and even to experience it. We have a lot in common as human beings, but we also have some pretty significant differences sometimes. I went to Vietnam for the first time about 4 years ago, and I'm going to go again in a couple of weeks to give a talk. And when I got there, it's the first time I had gone to Asia, and I really realized I am no longer in Kansas here. People approach life very, very differently. And when I went to a Catholic church on a Sunday evening, there was not a gray hair in the audience, and the place had about 5,000 people packed into this thing. It's what young couples do on Sunday when they go out on their dates. There's a vibrant faith there, but and it's a Catholic faith, but it looks somewhat different than it does for me. So I think the ecumenical conversation is another opportunity for us to be able to cross over those racial and ethnic boundaries. And the dynamics of how to do ecumenical conversation are somewhat similar to the way you do interracial and interethnic types of conversation, insofar as you have to approach the conversation with a deep sense of humility, a deep sense of curiosity about the other, and wanting to truly understand them and ask authentic, real questions to try to understand how they think about their faith, what their experience of their faith is. Just as it is if it's an interracial conversation, it's the first time you encounter an African American, a person of African American ancestry, to really want to know what's it like to live as an African American, and what kind of how have you understood the history of your race in this country in particular, and how have you dealt with that? So there's got to be humility, curiosity, a growing sense of empathy, as we mentioned, a growing, and also a commitment to stay in the conversation, and to realize that there's going to be rough. You're going to probably hit rough bumps in the conversation, but in ecumenical conversation, the end game is actually encountering Christ at a deeper level, and so that should keep us in, even if it's rough going. And we know, for any of us who work in parish, parish life is not as clean and idyllic as people would sometimes hope or think. Oftentimes, it's pretty rough going, leading a common life with very different people, and but the parishes that really are wonderful examples of what it means to be a Christian community are the ones that hang in there with each other and kind of get through the rough spots and break through to new insights.
Okay, thank you. Here is another question. Do you recommend that we define Christian move in the classroom and present Catholics as members of the Christian community?
I'm sorry, I missed that first part. Could you say that one more time?
Do you recommend that we define, perhaps they mean the Christian movement in the classroom?
I didn't catch that word. I didn't catch that word.
Do you define, or do you recommend that we define the Christian movement in the classroom and present Catholics as part of the Christian community?
Yes, we absolutely have to do that. In fact, our ecumenical tradition within the Catholic Church is very strong on saying that the shared baptism that we have, that the people who have had that baptism have the right to call themselves Christian, and obviously we're Christian. I had a discussion in Manhattan one time at a conference with a woman who was from some kind of interdenominational church, a lovely woman, but she made reference when we were talking at a break, she made reference to the fact that her daughter brought home a Catholic boy, and they were a little upset at first because they wanted their daughter to marry a Christian, and she didn't realize that she was actually insulting me, and so we had a long discussion about what a Catholic is. We are part of the Christian Church, and other Christians actually are one with us on a certain level. So I think it's dishonest to suggest that we're something other than Christians. I don't think we need to be shy about being proud of the heritage that we have as Catholics, but to present ourselves as something other than part of Christianity is actually intellectually dishonest.
Okay, all right, thank you. How do we handle the importance of Mary with non-Catholics?
Well, that's a really good question, and I think part of it is going back to the ancient church, in which they had the opportunity to. They fought over whether she should be called the Mother of Christ or the Mother of God, and the Theotokos, Mother of God, was actually an awareness that she played a really, really significant role within the salvation brought by Christ. So I think the way we present her is, first of all, knowing what the Church actually teaches about her. There's some areas of Mariology, some areas that are dealing with the Blessed Mother and her role within Christianity that actually could lead to inaccurate understandings of her role, and there's some that actually kind of misrepresent her role. But being grounded in what the Church really teaches about Mary and her being a role model for all of us, that's shared increasingly by lots of our Protestant brothers and sisters. I've met Baptists who actually pray the Rosary. So I think part of the challenge in doing that is that oftentimes some Protestants will think that we consider Mary the fourth person of the Trinity, and we can do a lot of good for ecumenical advancement by really explaining very carefully the role Mary actually does play.
Okay, thank you. And this kind of leads into the next question. Does ecumenical conversation result in a watering down of the Catholic faith?
Yeah, and that's really a good question, because the honest answer is it could, and it can, and it has. It doesn't have to, and when it's done right, it doesn't at all. But there are times in which we want so much to be able to build bridges across our divides that we're afraid to talk about the ways in which we're different. And we need to develop some skills on when we get into our difference, because we have to have a certain level of trust with each other before we can really get into difference. We have to learn to appreciate each other's gifts, to honor each other's humanity and faith, and to have a genuine love and concern for each other. And when you do that, it's like in a family or in a marriage or among siblings, then when you have that bond and that solid relationship, you can begin to get into differences and begin to figure out how you're going to deal with those differences, either to help change each other's mind a little bit, or to maybe even the way you understand part of your own faith tradition may end up changing in conversation. You may go back to the sources to find out, now, do I really understand this correctly? And then learn, well, in fact, I sort of did, but there's certain portions of what the church teaches that I didn't really fully understand, and there's nuances here that are critically important to really fully understanding it.
Okay, thank you. We have a quick 4 minutes left. I'll do one quick question. This takes it to a local level. What about the division in a parish? In this particular person's parish, some of the committees, feel like they're at opposite ends of working together. The school sometimes in the religious ed classes don't, one is the stepchild of the other. There's a polarization within a parish. What do you recommend to do to help heal that?
Yeah, that also is a very excellent question. In a previous life, I spent 9 years directing an office of religious education and worked with 147 parishes. My wife is also a director of religious education in a Catholic parish, and she brings home those divisions. I work at a university where you have those divisions among colleges and schools and sometimes among faculty, and it goes to the very heart of what ecumenism is trying to address, that inability to be able to see in each other a brother and a sister, to see in each other a common mission. I think there's lots of techniques that you can talk about. I think the thing that is really critically important is to hang in there and to realize that by the mere fact that you remain engaged, that's the only way that this polarization will actually change. I think the other thing to do is to develop skills in appropriately challenging people of all persuasions who become intolerant of others, who cease to listen to others, who assume that they understand what somebody's thinking before the person has actually fully articulated what they're thinking. I think Cardinal Casper is dead on right that, and Pope John Paul II, that spiritual ecumenism is the actual core of our being able to be a person of an ecumenical mind and heart, that we need to be praying constantly, because it's ultimately God that melts hearts. And I don't know that we pray enough about the polarization and divisions that we have within the church, but it's a combination of kindness and gentleness and all of the things in Galatians 5 that are examples of a Christian living a truly authentic faith that melts people's hearts and helps them to think of maybe a different way, and sometimes challenging thought and saying that the thing you just said there is not Christian. It's not a Christian attitude, and sometimes prophetically name behaviors that are not right, but only do that sparingly, because it's not something that you can use effectively if you use it a lot. And then I think the whole idea behind ecumenism is reconciling. So becoming experts at reconciliation, become experts at both saying I'm sorry and accepting apologies, and truly forgiving and forgetting, which is hard for all of us as human beings. I think those are all part of the skills that are necessary for this kind of work, and hopefully it's something we're going to be able to grow into in the next few years. I think this particular Pope, he comes from Latin American culture where relationships are really central to their understanding of everything. And I'm hoping that he's going to be really good at helping us to move beyond some of the divisions that actually exist.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to read you one quote. I know we're right at 8 o'clock. We'll be done in about 2 minutes. Sheila wrote, and I think I just wanted to take the time to read it because of her mentions here. I am the DRE in an Army chapel where we have 11 different congregations, including an Islamic prayer meeting, a Jewish community, and then everyone else is some kind of Christian. I think your observation that we need to strive for humility, curiosity, and a willingness to stay in the conversation are essential. I also think we have to be willing to allow for a little bit of agreeing to disagree. Sometimes you have to listen and then be willing to back up and give people time and space to think. I'm surprised by how just being around each other so much seems to detoxify negative preconceptions. And very, very poignant. At that, we are at the 8 o'clock hour. Did you want to comment on that, or do you think she said it all?
No, I think that's exactly right. And what we didn't talk about at all was the church's engagement of people of non-Christian religions, which is a whole other area that the church has been exploring since Vatican II and before Vatican II. And some of the same skill sets are at play, you know. So I think she's named it perfectly. That's wise words from somebody who's living it.
All right, there's another question, but I'm going to email that to you, and Christine will answer you offline. We appreciate all of the time that you've taken to join us this evening. I do have a little bit of a closing. I'm going to take the screen back over to my computer, and let me see here. If I do this right, show my screen. Okay, all right. Sorry, folks. Trying to hold the phone and things at the same time. Okay, here we are. Just one quick commercial. Next week we are having Father Alan Deck do a presentation with reflections on Pope Francis and the new evangelization. All of you will receive an invitation to register for that. And with that, I do want to thank Dr. Markuly for your insight tonight. It's been wonderful, a great evening. We will send everyone a couple of handouts. Earlier today they had asked for the One Holy Catholic and Apostolic slide, as well as there was one with a lot of the church documents. So we'll be sure to include you in on sending that out to everyone. And you'll get an email offering the certificate of attendance, as well as the recording. And then with that, I'm going to close with this prayer. The prayer is found, if you see at the very bottom, WeBelieveInShare.com. It's a blog that Kathy Hendricks writes for us. And so I just wanted to close by reading the prayer, because after hearing this presentation, I know for my own self there's so much to think about and to reevaluate how I look at my own religion in perspective of world religions. Gracious God, open the door to my soul and bring me peace and perspective. May I learn to be at home with myself and to extend a hospitable welcome to your indwelling spirit. Open the door to my heart and grace me with compassion and understanding. May I see the eyes of Christ, all of those I am called to catechize. Open the door to my mind and soften my thoughts. May I make room for both ideas and imagination, ever aware that the knowledge is a gift of your spirit. Give me a joyful soul, heart, and mind, so that I share with others the great news of salvation and redemption. Through your Son, Jesus Christ, I pray. Amen. On that, I thank everybody, and we will be closing. And the other questions we will cover for you. So thanks, everybody, for joining us. Dr. Markuly, thank you very much. I know you have such a busy schedule, so we really appreciate your being there. Rosemary will include a copy of the prayer with the handouts, too. Alrighty, thank you, and good night or good early evening to those. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.